Guess we should get going. Hi, everybody. My name is Wesley Gee. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Works Design Communications, and I'd just like to thank you for coming here for this session. We're all really excited to be here, to be sharing with you some of our research, some of our experiences, some of our perspectives around sustainability from the perspective of communications and reporting. But I think what you'll find through the conversations that we're having through the Q&A is a lot of this stuff is going to be a reflection of just what are some of the things going on in our respective organizations that we happen to be communicating and reporting on. So I think you'll find a lot of things here really interesting. And certainly, I think how we're going to be structuring this session is first for each of us to be providing a brief presentation. Following that, I'll be going through some of what our firm has learned as far as sustainability, reporting and communications trends and best practices, and having a bit of healthy banter back and forth with Whitney and Tim, who will introduce themselves in just one moment. And of course, making sure that there's plenty of time for questions from the floor. So I want to just briefly introduce our panelists for today. Tim Faveri, the young man over here. He is Maple Leaf Foods Vice President of Sustainability and Shared Value. I think Tim has been there for somewhere around 4 years. Yes. Previously with several other organizations and really leading the charge for a lot of Maple Leaf Foods sustainability efforts. Our second panelist is a newer face to the organization that she is at now, but Whitney is at Bank of Montreal as the Senior Advisor of Sustainability Strategy, Disclosure, and Impact Measurement. And I have to say, she has a lot of experience as well within this space, having worked previously with Canadian Tire and with TrueCost. I think what I want to do first is just to go over a few kind of basic details around what we had covered in the research, to be able to then turn things over to Whitney and Tim, who will speak on their respective organizations and really just have some constructive back and forth. So, you know, for this presentation, what we're going to go through in a little bit is really just a number of things of what our organization has learned. For the Works Design Communications, we are a design communications firm that specializes in sustainability in terms of how companies can improve how they engage, communicate, report on sustainability. So it's really important for us to be able to learn what is happening within the broader space in terms of, you know, how companies are looking at their communications from the perspective of content, in terms of interactivity, in terms of design, and more recently in terms of digital strategy, as far as how they're using elements like social media. So we'll cover some of those different areas. But I think maybe it would be best just to turn things over to our two experts over here. Whitney, would you want to go first? Sure. So I'll turn things over to Whitney.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney McWade. I'm Senior Advisor, as Wes mentioned, on BMO's sustainability team. And we'll just start off today by giving a quick overview of what sustainability is at BMO. And I'll start with this little video.
All the money in the world can't see around the corner or beyond the surface. All the money in the world can't put a new idea on the wall or a hand on a shoulder. It can't change minds or challenge expectations. All the money in the world can't do the hard thing, the right thing. All the money in the world isn't enough to do what needs doing. It takes something else, another kind of currency, to grow what's good in the world. It takes the best of us, working with people, not just for them. Embracing the hard stuff and finishing the job. It takes turning values into value, being a source of courage and connection. It takes being all in all the time. It takes BMO, boldly growing the good.
So that video features a number of BMO's clients, and it's meant to just show that in the over 200 years that BMO's been around, we've developed really deep roots with the customers and the communities where we do business. And that is the fundamental basis of sustainability at BMO. So we view sustainability as a core part of our social purpose, and nothing about that is new to BMO. That's how we've been operating forever. But this purpose platform was announced in June, and BMO's purpose is to boldly grow the good in business and life. And with that announcement, BMO made a number of commitments to drive positive change for our customers, our employees, and the communities where we work. Those three commitments are outlined here and include doubling the good for a sustainable future, for a thriving economy, and for an inclusive society. So our commitment to a sustainable future includes mobilizing $400 billion for sustainable finance by 2025, which is a lot of money, and can be broken down into $250 billion that we help to influence through our asset management activities. So integrating sustainability considerations in our investment approach, engaging with the companies that we invest in to help them improve their sustainability performance, and offering that engagement expertise to third-party asset managers to help them integrate sustainability into their approach to investing. So that's $250 billion. The other $150 billion is capital that we've committed to make available to companies pursuing sustainable outcomes, which includes launching an impact investing fund, $250 million that we're looking to help use to support companies with solutions to some of the sustainability problems that our other clients face and helping them bring those to scale. The commitment to a thriving economy is a commitment to double our support for small business and women entrepreneurs. And our commitment to an inclusive society involves removing all barriers to inclusion when working for and in partnership with BMO. So that would cover our own diversity and inclusion efforts for our employees. We have targets for representation of women, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, people of color, and also removing barriers to for our customers to engage with BMO. So ensuring financial inclusion for all types of people and communities, including through our Indigenous banking business, which BMO is well known for. So we think that by embedding these positive social, environmental, economic outcomes into BMO's really reason for existing, that we're well placed to be sustainability leaders in Canada and in the financial services sector more broadly. But what it means for a bank to be sustainable is rapidly evolving. It's no longer just about managing your own operations, so thinking about energy use or waste management in your building portfolio. Increasingly, banks are being looked upon to use their role as a central player in the economy to grow sustainable outcomes. And we're doing that by directing capital to customers or clients who share our values and our goals. So to draw on some big sustainability goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were launched in, I believe, 2005, were a key driver to our purpose and our commitments. And BMO recognizes that we have a role to play in helping mobilize capital towards achieving those goals. Sustainability is also increasingly becoming a normative expectation for companies. So think of it as like an ethical custom that our stakeholders are imposing on us, a welcome imposition for how the company should be operating and the role that we should play in society. And so in order to continue to be viewed as sustainability leaders going forward, it's the Sustainability Office's role at BMO to interpret these trends and make sure that we're staying on top of them. And we do that through 4 kind of key functions of our sustainability office. Firstly, sustainability strategy. So our group, which is 5 people strong, are the subject matter experts and kind of champions for sustainability initiatives across the bank. So we provide advice to the various lines of business and corporate support areas on how their programs and strategies should be evolving in line with these expectations. And the Sustainable Finance Commitment is a good example of that. That was ideated within our office and proposed to the strategy team and adopted, and is now kind of spun back out into the business who are responsible for achieving those goals. We also play a key role in risk management, so establishing policies, procedures, governance mechanisms, and working closely with our enterprise risk team to understand where we may be exposed to social or environmental risks and developing programs to manage those. Operational sustainability is still important to us, so our office is responsible for implementing our enterprise-wide environmental policy, which includes commitments to being carbon neutral. So BMO's been carbon neutral since 2010. We're always working on new and more ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and implementing waste management programs. So we've just launched internally, for example, a program focused on plastics, with the goal of eliminating single-use plastics across our operations. And then finally, a key role that we play is on tracking and measuring the positive impacts of the sustainability activities that are going on across the organization. And working very closely with investor relations, our communications team, marketing, and others to tell that sustainability story. And given that's the focus of this panel on reporting, I thought I'd take the next few minutes just to go over BMO's approach to sustainability reporting and what our suite of reporting kind of looks like. So we use lots of different avenues to tell this story, but our annual environmental, social, and governance report is our main disclosure. It's mainly an online PDF document. It's over 100 pages long and goes into detail about how we approach, perform, and some highlights on key sustainability topics that we deem material to the company. And those are selected based on in-depth stakeholder engagement, both internally and externally to BMO. Our next report will be coming out in December, and the logos along the bottom are just to show that there's lots of different frameworks and reporting standards out there that Wes will get into in more detail, but these help companies decide how to prepare their reports and what information should be included. Our report is compliant with the Global Reporting Initiative, the one on the left, but we also make efforts to align it to other standards like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and others. Each of the standards has kind of a different view on what should be included in these reports depending on the intended audience. So we think that by aligning to as many of them as we can, we're helping to make that report useful to the widest number of users. Some topics are so kind of pervasive and important that they deserve more fulsome discussion than we can allot in the 2 or 3 pages per topic area in our sustainability report, and climate change is a good example of that. And so this year we're working on a much more fulsome discussion of climate change, and we'll be publishing a separate climate change report as a supplement to our ESG report. So similarly to climate change, we get a lot of questions about that. We get a lot of questions about various other non-financial issues that are topical in the world today. And so to address those requests, we produce this kind of suite of statements on current issues. And They live on our sustainability website, and they just summarize our stance in relation to that issue, things like human rights, anti-money laundering, our relationship with political parties. And while sustainability doesn't really own the content of those statements, there's a whole team, at BMO responsible for anti-money laundering, but we play a role in advising what should be included in those based on what we're hearing from our stakeholders. And then finally, a big part of our sustainability disclosure program has to do with the various ratings companies and research organizations that use these reports. They produce scores and assessments of our sustainability program. And that's really important to us because investors really rely on these third-party assessments for their understanding of how the companies that they're investing in are performing. So the numbers that you see up here are results from a company called Sustainalytics, which is a prominent ratings company. These are publicly available on Yahoo Finance, so anybody can go in and see for most publicly listed companies how we perform. BMO was ranked this year 92nd percentile for our overall sustainability performance and above average for each of the environment, social, and governance pillars. So it's nice to see that we're doing well. It's good feedback that our program is evolving in a way that is in line with market expectations. But much more than that, we think that the research that these companies produce is really valuable. We get very detailed reports that we can dive into and identify, importantly, areas where we may not be performing that well. And we can use that information to help drive our strategy going forward. So with that, I think I'll leave it there, and we can get into any further details about any of that during the panel.
Thanks, Whitney.
And our next panelist is Tim Faveri. I should have prefaced this to mention why these two amazing people are here on this panel. I mean, they represent two Canadian leaders within the sustainability space. I mean, BMO, Maple Leaf Foods are widely regarded for a lot of the efforts they've been making in this space. I mean, I think with all companies, they've been on a journey. There's still, there is still a journey ahead to be able to get to move towards sustainability. But, I think given the background of the people here and the companies, I think that there's a lot that we can learn from their experiences.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. I hope it's going to be of value to you. My name's Tim. I've been with Maple Leaf, as Wes said, for about 4.5 years now. Had a long kind of winding career in sustainability here in Canada. Consider myself a little bit of a dinosaur when I look at Whitney and the young leaders that are coming through in the sustainability space. Prior to Maple Leaf, I ran sustainability for about 7 years at Tim Hortons Inc. When it was a Canadian company and national iconic brand. Prior to that, about 5 years with Deloitte and led the sustainability and climate change practice out of Toronto. And what we did a lot of was developing corporate social responsibility strategies for big and small organizations right across Canada and the US. And over that time, reporting was one of the key platforms for any organization that wanted to begin to think about sustainability, to communicate more about what their organizations are doing. And the guidance and advice that we would give our customers or our clients was, you really, when you're developing a sustainability strategy and then want to report on it, you really have to get the lay of the land of your own organization. And sustainability reporting should be a journey in itself. And don't just slap a report together and say you've done it, but do it very meaningfully and under a structured process. And that typically was around 12 to 18 months of doing some strong benchmarking internally and externally to your organization, and then putting a report together. It's really interesting because I don't think, and we both work with the works, but I can't think of two more different companies in different sectors. You know, finance and Maple Leaf Foods is a protein company. We are the largest pork producer in Canada, one of the largest poultry processors in Canada, and now one of the largest plant-based protein manufacturers in North America. But when you get down and talk about sustainability, the similarities are incredible. Okay, so that's part of the discussion I think that we're going to shape today. Again, Maple Leaf is a social purpose. Ours is called Raise the Good in Food. We launched Raise the Good in Food in mid-2017. It was about 18 months of work to create that purpose and do some really robust deep dives with our employees and other stakeholders. And again, as to what Whitney said, you know, purpose really defines the why an organization exists. If an organization can define that, and then as well define what social and environmental issues or needs that society has, you bring that together, and that's a purpose. So I also think that a website or sustainability reporting really is a gateway into what an organization is all about. And it's evolved over the last 15, 20 years. We used to produce sustainability reports that were only printable, and we, you know, hand them out at meetings and stuff like that, you know, these little books. And now, you know, there's multiple layers on websites and PDF reports. And so just with the next couple minutes, I'll just kind of navigate you around of how Maple Leaf is doing it. So you go to mapleleaffoods.com, and this is the landing page. It's all about what we're doing in the sustainability space. These panels, when you scroll through them, identify some of the key topics and issues that we're focusing on. And these panels are actually linked to our stakeholder engagement in terms of we're constantly monitoring our website traffic and where people are going. So if more people are going towards food security at any one time of the month or year, we can create the center panel for you know, dialogue on food insecurity. We also have a number of different websites for our brands. One thing, again, like Wes said, a lot of people don't really understand what a lot of companies actually do, but we're a house of brands. Maple Leaf Foods has a number of brands that are sold at grocery retail, and we're also the biggest supplier to the Canadian grocery retailers as well. So when you buy their products, whether they're meat or plant-based protein, PC brand, PC Free From, Compliments, all the big retailers have their own private labels. We're one of the largest suppliers to those products and those brands. As well, you go to restaurants, both fast casual and quick service, and other food service entities like the campus here. We're likely a supplier to those food outlets as well. So we've got dominant market share with our brands and within the supply chain. And what's powerful about that, of course, from an income and a revenue generating perspective and an economic perspective, a large company that is fully integrated in the food supply chain, that gives us scale. And so when we move in a direction towards a more sustainable agriculture or sustainable production, smaller producers, smaller entities can see that, take that as a direction, leadership direction, and move in the same way. And that's really important when you talk about large banks or large organizations like Maple Leaf. So from an overall sustainability perspective, we also have pillars. These pillars were identified around sustainability through stakeholder engagement. We focus on better food, better care, better communities, and better planet. We have animals in our direct care. The better care pillar for us actually is the most frequent trafficked section of our website traditionally. that and all the nutritional aspects of our food products. And our communities and planet pillars are now creeping up as well with respect to traffic and interest. And that's really exciting. Environment usually for a food company had been much lower in traffic and interest up until the last couple of years. When you go to our sustainability report, it is an interactive PDF similar to BMO's. You know, we're up over 100 pages. A lot of that is in our global reporting index. So the Global Reporting Initiative, the framework that we've chosen as BMO has chosen as one of theirs, houses a significant amount of information for analysts, investors, and gets into the real granular detail of performance indicators and performance on economic, social, governance, and environmental issues. Our purpose is based on our statement called "Raise the Good in Food." When you think of how society has evolved over the last number of years, and then these global drivers of change that we're seeing in society, environment, water, food insecurity, human health, antibiotic resistance, you know, population increase, I could be going on and on and on. And I truly believe that as our population increases to potentially, 10 billion people by 2040, 2050, food and food production can be put right at the nexus of society as one of the most important spaces for humanity to be able to survive into the future. So when we developed our purpose, we realized this, and Raise the Good in Food symbolizes the why our organization exists. You know, raise is an action-oriented word. It means to lift, to elevate, to raise the bar, to continuously improve, to raise animals in our care, to raise nutritious plants as well, and grains, and the whole agricultural side of our business. Good food means healthy food, soulful food, nutritious food, culturally appropriate food, sustainably raised food, and that really resonated with us as we went through this whole process. With any good purpose, as Whitney and BMO understand too, you need a guiding star, you need a vision. And for us, that is our vision is to be the most sustainable protein company on earth. And that is a massively ambitious vision. It's bold for us. It's a vision that we realize that we may not be able to achieve, but we're going to try really hard to get there. In some aspects of our sustainability program and of our organization, we may already be there when we look at other organizations in Canada, the US, and globally. But in others, we might not get there, and that's where we see this whole aspect of journey still coming into play, and as well the whole notion of continuous improvement. We firmly believe as well that this journey should be based on around progress, not perfection at any one time. What we're calling sustainable today might not be considered sustainable 5-10 years from now, right? So we always have to continue to raise the bar. This blueprint is really important to us. It sits on everyone's desktop and everyone's desk at Maple Leaf Foods around the country. And it really is our business strategy, our strategy on a page. Here in the middle, when we talk about how we'll create shared value, are the 6 core business strategies of how we're going to achieve our vision and ultimately achieve our purpose of raising the good in food. So in behind these 6 business strategies are over 30 key priorities, or what we call blueprint priorities, with senior leadership team accountability for each one, that we have a robust system of performance indicators and processes and internal reward system to drive the business forward to help achieve this. If sustainability isn't linked with your business strategy, I fear that organizations are really managing sustainability from the side, and it's not truly embedded. I'll be the first to admit, when I was at Tim Hortons, we had a pretty kick-ass sustainability program of the day. You know, we're on #1 at corporate nights, 100 most global sustainable corporations on earth, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Leadership Index of the CDP, all this kind of stuff. But the challenge is the business strategy of Tim Hortons of the day was to open as many restaurants as possible, right? And so that's a clear indicator that it's a great corporate strategy, but it truly isn't baked in and embedded into the business. I think the biggest trend that we're seeing in this space is the notion of purpose, the notion of complete alignment with your business. Call it sustainability 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever it is. But as Wes, I think, will indicate, the tactical corporate social responsibility triple bottom line frameworks are quickly becoming a thing of the past. Okay, you know, any success of any corporate program or purpose or whatever has to start with the tone for the top. Michael McCain has been our CEO for over 25 years. He's a principal owner of the company as well. What I think is very powerful about long tenured leadership, particularly at the top, at the CEO, is that we've got core values and principles that have been in place at the company for decades, and everyone understands them. And with purpose, we use our company values as the base of the pyramid of getting up to raise the good in food, and that is so important. With large publicly traded companies, you know, the average tenure of a CEO is 18 to 24 months. And when a new CEO comes in, guess what? They redo the whole senior leadership team. They put a new corporate strategy in place. They realign the business to meet their own needs and goals. And so we're really fortunate as a Canadian company to have a single CEO that will be CEO until he chooses to retire. And his replacement will share those same values and allow our purpose to thrive even after Michael McCain has left his post. Again, with respect to our report, we've organized it through how sustainability is defined at Maple Leaf and through our 4 pillars. And then for investors and others that really want to get into the weeds and go to the GRI, they can hyperlink straight through to the GRI index. My job title is Sustainability and Shared Value, and that's a little bit of a different concept as well. So shared value is actually a business strategy. It's a business strategy that was developed by some really smart academics a number of years ago from Harvard, Michael Porter, Michael Kramer. And their business strategy basically says, you know, create competitiveness and stakeholder and investor and shareholder value by focusing your business on addressing social and environmental needs. And when you think of what the classic Venn diagram for purpose, they're perfectly aligned. So we've chosen shared value as our core business strategy to help do that. And in shared value for a food company, for a food manufacturer, how can we meet the needs of society through our product development? Well, we have to look at our products and reconfigure or create new market opportunities with our products to address those social environmental needs. Raised with antibiotics, addressing significant public safety issue globally with respect to antibiotic resistance in the public safety realm. Going all natural on our products, stripping out ingredients that people can't even pronounce, and all the artificials. Migrating towards plant-based protein to complement our meat-based protein. We know that meat production is a significant protagonist in the fight against climate change. To raise meat is significantly more environmentally impactful than to raise grains and plant protein and consume. So it's all about a balance for us and how we can reconfigure our products and shift our business to be more sustainable. Eliminating waste, key pillar for us to drive efficiency across our business. What drives efficiency also improves profitability within the 4 walls of our operations. We have close to 30 manufacturing operations across Canada, 2 in the US. We have over 300 barns in Manitoba that are raising pigs. The more efficient we can be on electricity, natural gas, water, solid waste, a bigger benefit we can provide back to the planet, and as well, the more money we can save, which help drives profitability and the whole economic side of sustainability. And lastly, this pillar over here called community involvement is really signature to our organization. As one of Canada's largest food companies, we quickly realized that Canadians, from a food security and perspective, are not doing that well. 1 in 8 families across Canada are food insecure at any one time of year. And 1 in 6 children also experience food insecurity. And at the same time, Canada is one of the richest countries on the planet. And that's pretty tragic. So as a large player, and when I talked about scale earlier, this provides us the opportunity to set a leadership position in this space. What community involvement does for a shared value company is really drive at core causes of a social issue where you can have influence in the communities where we operate. What's very evident in the food security space is that the amount of food that Canadians have is not the issue. We have too much food in Canada. We waste 1/3 of our food globally and in Canada. The core cause issues of food insecurity for Canadians are income and poverty and accessibility and infrastructure and a disparate network of food organizations and mental health and stigma and a whole bunch of issues that no one entity in Canada is truly focusing on. And that's what we've tried to do here. We created a not-for-profit 2 years ago called the Maple Leaf Center for Action on Food Insecurity. And its core mission is to connect and scale core cause issues, scale organizations that are driving towards these core cause issues and connect them right across the country. And in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Center for Action has set their bold goal to reduce food insecurity in Canada by 50% by 2030. So this is a big goal. This is essential to how we define us and our purpose. And this is how shared value embedded into organization can do that. So I'm not going to go through all this. Wes is going to take you through it. It's multi-layered. You'll see through Wes's presentation, and this is, as we now move into this, how we want to make it interactive. So please speak up, ask questions. Wes is a great facilitator. He's going to take us through all that. And I don't know how to get back to your presentation. So.
That's okay. I'll be the technical whiz. Yeah, I'm just so happy to have these guys here. They're an amazing bunch. I guess maybe before I get into the presentation on trends and having a bit of back and forth, does anyone have any burning questions that they'd like to be asking Tim or Whitney? And I'm just going to pass the microphone over because this whole thing is zoomed. Here we go. I'll turn this on here.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I appreciate everything that's been said today. I'm a business strategy professor focusing on sustainable development. I'm also a CPA, so this is my area. So I have a few comments to make. I saw lots of organizations up there. You may want to look into the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, because I didn't see that up there in either of your presentations. I also wanted to mention that this idea of purpose needs an adjective in front of it, because you can have a purpose of maximizing profit. That is a purpose for an organization. So we need to call it sustainable purpose or something like that. We need to change this word purpose. I think it's a little bit opportunistic. I hear it across all organizations. It's not just yours. It's become a trend. And it's because you're going after millennials. You want them in your organizations. You want to bring them in and have them feel like there is purpose in their jobs and feel connected to organizations. So let's be honest that there's a lot of opportunistic reasons behind some of this language, and we need to be very specific about what we mean. Another issue, I have lots of questions. So in sustainable finance, which is also one of my areas, I'd like to hear how BMO is actually defining that. So does that mean divestment of fossil fuels specifically? You mentioned $400 billion going towards, I guess, an intention towards sustainable finance. What proportion of your entire asset management portfolio is that? How much, and you said 250 billion, I believe, out of that 400 billion you're going to motivate. So I'd like to hear more specifics around the percentages of the total portfolio and how you're going to do that and whether that means divestment of fossil fuels. And for Maple Leaf Foods, I'd like to understand, for example, how are animals being treated and things like food waste, which you brought up. How are you going to deal with food waste in your global supply chains?
Yeah, thanks for the questions on sustainable finance. We're getting a lot of questions on our $400 billion commitment. And so to break it down, I guess, in a little bit more detail, and just to note, the program for sustainable finance is still evolving. And so the commitment that was made originated in the Sustainability Office, and the commitment is to double our existing sustainable finance activity to $400 billion. As a result, a sustainable finance group was created that's located in our capital markets group, and their role is to bring together all the sustainable finance activity that's happening across the organization. And our activities in global asset management, BMO Global Asset Management, which is our investment management arm, are really a huge part of that commitment. And in terms of being able to provide you with a percentage of assets under management that we manage sustainably versus otherwise, we're still in the process of getting our ducks in a row to be able to provide those numbers. And a big part of the 250 is BMO GAM's role through a service called RIO, which stands for Responsible Engagement Overlay. So we have a 16-person responsible investing team based in London who are very, very highly regarded for their expertise in responsible investing. They have a very strong investee engagement program and proxy advisory program. And so our RIO service makes that expertise available to other third-party asset managers to help them leverage that and use that in their own investment process. And that's why we use the word mobilize. So it's not our own, it's not all of our own money, but we're influencing the way that others use their money as well. And just to note on your comment on the UNPRI, BMO is a signatory to the UNPRI. So thanks for that. And there was one, divestment from fossil fuels. Yeah. It's a very hot topic in Canada, especially. So climate change is a big risk to the financial system. We don't think that divesting from fossil fuels is the right answer. The IEA, energy demand will continue to increase globally, especially as the population increases and the middle class increases, and the demand for oil and gas is expected to increase out to 2050. And so we don't think that by abandoning our clients in the oil and gas sector, which forms such a huge basis of the Canadian economy, that that's a positive outcome. We think that we can use our influence to work closely with them to identify and implement solutions that make their operations cleaner, that would allow us to shift more smoothly to a lower carbon economy and in a way that considers the potential economic and social consequences that these companies could have on Canada.
Well said. Tim, how would you like to talk about elements around animal welfare? And I think shots have been,
Great questions. Thank you for them. As I indicated earlier, animal welfare is one of the most important issues to this company. We govern animal welfare like we do sustainability. So we have a vice president of animal care, one of my peers who reports directly up to the CEO, as I do. We have been benchmarked by global animal welfare organizations as being a leader in this space because of the investments we've been making right across the board into new innovative systems of housing, of transportation, of measurement, and of behavior change. Animal welfare to us has two main components. One where there could be negative impacts on how the animal is raised from its environment, its housing, its feed, its shelter, its building, that kind of thing. And those for example, are pretty easy fixes. We can throw money and renovate barns to make them as sustainable or animal welfare friendly. Identify areas of opportunity where animals are not able to exhibit natural behaviors while they're in our care and retrofit that. And right through to the processing side of the business through controlled atmosphere stunning and humane methods of processing. And what's very interesting is that when companies like BMO and Maple Leaf and others make business decisions, what does a senior leadership do? Well, show me the return on investment of the $2 million of capital you want to spend. For us, we've advanced so far in our animal welfare program. Most of the projects we put forth for capital, like retrofitting barns or implementing a $20 million controlled atmosphere stunning system at a poultry plant, has zero return on investment. And we look at it and say, is this the right thing to do for the animal, for our business, for the future, for the consumers? Yes, we'll make that investment. And I think that's pretty rare with organizations that perhaps don't have a purpose or are all focused on shareholder value. On food waste, this has been an issue that has been growing over the last 5 years or so, and we're very fortunate that it's baked into the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly the World Resources Institute has developed an actual protocol on food waste. Like the greenhouse gas protocol, organizations that are impacted by food waste can use this protocol and track and measure it on an apples to apples scale. For food processor and producer, food waste in that protocol is defined more at the consumer level and the distribution level. We call it food loss when it's within our control and in our four walls, right? And that's super important to understand. We have a very, very high organics and solid waste diversion rate. We're 92% landfill diverted right now. When you think of our proteins, plant protein and animal protein, there are a certain number of aspects that will never reach humans for consumption. We call them inedibles, right? And what's very fortunate for our sector is that there's a whole different sector called the rendering sector that accepts the inedibles from a meat plant and then can make really high quality other products. All the pet food industry is based on rendering of animals. Makeup, oils, tallow, a whole bunch of incredible products come from inedibles of animals. So we're tracking it, we're monitoring. We made a commitment to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2025, as with our other environmental indicators. So it's an incredibly important issue, and it relates to that efficiency measure as well. From a supply chain perspective, we are a Canadian company. All our animals are Canadian raised, they're local. All our plant-based protein is North American based. We source from Canada and the US. The plant-based protein companies we acquired exist in the US. So we're not a global organization per se. So that makes it a little bit easier for us. Not like when I was at Tim Hortons and I had to go down into Central and South America on coffee sourcing ventures, right? So I'm really happy about that we can have a much more direct connection through to our supply chain, right down to the farm.
Great.
Thanks for that. We will have some time for Q&A. We'll just take a break in a little bit here. But just to give you a few basic details around some of the research that we conducted here, which is kind of forming, I guess, a bit of the basis for today's session. So, this is research that has been conducted over the past 8 years, covering companies that are based across the globe in all of the following sectors here. And involving a number of different topics. And apologies, looks like the formatting is a little wishy-washy here. But I think you'll have access to a PDF version of the deck afterwards. So it does cover a combination of topics that might fall under, what I think of some of the more nerdy areas that I'm into around content and around following standards and frameworks and things that are of key interest to analysts and investors, but also thinking about design, looking at theme, purpose, storytelling, these things that might invoke some type of an emotional response for one's own people or for communities and consumers. And then looking at elements around digital strategy, around what are the newer ways that we can actually engage with people rather than simply informing them. So going to cover kind of some of these topics statistically. What are some of the things that we've learned, some examples of effective practice, and kind of bounce things off my two expert colleagues here. So first, I think before we get into that, for those who do know Shashi Kant, he'll be very happy to know that the term CSR is dead. It is really something where what we observed is that 42% of companies that are developing a sustainability report are calling it just that. The term CSR is something that is dated. It's something that certainly has more and more of a negative connotation associated with random acts of kindness. Even though that may not be the intent of what companies have to say, I think moving towards that notion of shared value or of sustainability is, I think, what we're seeing more and more of. And while the research also mainly looked at sustainability reports, we looked at how those cross-referenced with a company's annual financial report. And we could see that, within 88% of those reports, they were referencing sustainability or ESG. And 34% of companies included circular economy commitments. I was a little bit surprised with that, but very pleasantly surprised, I suppose, in a way, that companies are acknowledging the need for that type of commitment and mindset to move forward. So I think when we're first looking at smart reporting, the notion around this is for companies, we're certainly seeing them taking a more intentional approach to how they're reporting on sustainability. They are acknowledging that there are different audiences that want to be able to learn about what companies are doing or to be informed or engaged in different ways. So I think what we've seen in the past was a one-size-fits-all 100-page, document, sometimes printed as Tim had mentioned in the past. What we see more of is that companies are using their websites for a certain way. They're using a report for a certain way. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. So a PDF is something that is a given, for analysts, investors, for humans and for non-humans, for bots to be picking up on this kind of information. The PDF is often the most effective way to be able to develop that kind of document. But at the same time, companies are developing a stronger sustainability section of their website, which we would call a silo. And some other companies are also developing a microsite. That would be something where you might have a summary of the information in a report that is a bit more for that wider audience. And if they want to dig into the weeds, they can go to that report to really go into the details. The first example I want to share is with Nike. They did something very intentional here with, on the left-hand side, you can see their actual report, which is a bit more fact-based. It's something where they are meeting certain guidelines and frameworks, and it is meant to kind of just, to present what is going on in their organization as well as future targets. Whereas the website is intended to be more for that wider audience to tell their story, to be able to share a bit more context around some of the issues that they're working with. And not just a happy kind of thing. It's more about really helping people understand some of the issues and what's happening across their supply chain. And Tim had already mentioned this, certainly, but with their report and with their website, there is some information from the report that carries over to the website where it might be of interest to a wider audience. But that report really reflects that point in time where it shares the company's performance as it relates to future targets, for instance, but looking at where bits and pieces might be of interest to a wider audience. Complementary publications is something that we noticed quite a bit, where in addition to doing a report, there is that acknowledgement, kind of like what Whitney mentioned as well, where developing a publication specifically around, let's say, human rights or climate change may be that area of focus that the company needs to provide more detail on, where there's a greater level of interest. But also being able to provide just a straight data download for certain groups as well. So, you know, an example here from Alliance Data just shares, while they do their overall report, they do a materiality assessment or a prioritization exercise every few years, and they can share what happened at that point in time and reference that within the report, as well as having this kind of data download where you can see lots of really interesting data here, but also just referencing how it aligns to those key reporting standards like the GRI or SASB or others, and that will vary by company. When we're looking at integration, this doesn't necessarily just mean companies doing a quote-unquote integrated report, but it is really around how companies would be talking about how sustainability is integrated within their organization, within their strategy, rather than something that acts as a silo. So, you know, one of the first things that we were able to see is the extent to which companies have that board level sustainability committee. And we found that about 80% of companies do. So I want to preface it to say that our sample was what we believe would be the leaders within the sustainability space. This is not a reflection of what all companies are doing, let's say in Canada or North America. These would be what we would consider to be the top companies within their respective sectors. But around 80% of companies have this in place. From a reporting standpoint, I think it's really important for companies to think about how that information is shared. So being able to share some type of an illustration that shows structurally, what does it look like in terms of the leadership and accountability for sustainability, both at the board and at the executive level. And also, when a company is talking about its commitments, everyone is going to be sharing that letter from a president and a CEO, but it's the extent to which you might want to go into a little bit more detail, perhaps having that sustainability executive or a sustainability representative from the board to be able to really add that context that really helps share where the rubber hits the road. So the example here from Maple Leaf Foods shares a very straightforward, easy to understand structure that looks at where there's leadership and accountability around sustainability, both at the executive and at the board. How that relationship of that senior executive relates to other key functions within the organization. And this can be further explained. Another example from Taiwan Semiconductor provides some of those details, but also provides some actual insights from board members to share, you know, kind of what are some of the unique characteristics that each of those members are bringing to the table. So beyond the structure, being able to share, you know, where there is an actual skill set and you know, really what are some of the experiences and expectations that they're bringing to the table. When we're looking at leadership messages, we certainly see more and more, I should say we are seeing less and less of CEOs doing that kind of potpourri, talking about 12 different topics on a page of, you know, we do this, this, and the other thing. Hey, read our report, ta-da. You know, it's a little more around companies being able to talk about what are the 2 or 3 issues that are front and center, and to be able to do that with conviction, with commitments, with targets. In this case, Scania, being a transportation company, talking about climate change is absolutely critical. And with BMO, for instance, in addition to having the letter from the president and CEO, having the additional letter from the chair of the Sustainability Council, Simon Fish, is really something to show, you know, really what are the inner workings within BMO and where there is I guess just giving a really a stronger indication of what's really going on within the organization. And I just wanted to take a break here to see, you know, like with Whitney, if you could maybe talk a little bit about like how how your group is working with folks like Simon and how that interaction with the board kind of takes place.
Yeah, sure. So Simon, who this lovely photo you can see there, is the executive at BMO who's responsible for sustainability. He's the general counsel. So the sustainability office at BMO sits within legal. He reports directly to the CEO. Above that, we do also have sustainability responsibility embedded within our board of directors. So our audit, conduct, and review committee, their mandate was actually updated in 2018 to specifically include responsibility for oversight on sustainability. We meet with them annually, in particular with relation to our reporting. So they review and approve our report, and we use that opportunity to discuss with them any sustainability topics. Simon as well is the chair, as Wes mentioned, of our Sustainability Council, which is a group of about 18 senior leaders from across the organization, and we meet with them quarterly to discuss sustainability topics, and they help advise us on the implementation of our strategy. And so having representatives from so many different lines of business at the table is really helpful in getting sustainability integrated and embedding this culture and getting the tone from the top that helps to permeate through the organization.
Great. I mean, another element of integration is actually doing an integrated report. And that is something where, you know, culturally, that is something that requires a shift in many organizations to get people to work together, to agree on what are the most important things that we're going to address within our, this is essentially an expanded upon annual financial report. So they have a fiduciary duty to provide this, you know, key details, and with an integrated report to provide an expanded notion of you know, what are they trying to achieve? How are they performing? What are their goals and targets? You know, and several companies, particularly outside of North America, have been on this journey for a while. I'm pleasantly surprised to see that there are more within North America that are taking this step as well. And one big part of an integrated report is really being able to talk about that notion of how organizations do create and share value. So an example here, fairly straightforward, comes from Westpac. And I have to admit, this is one of the best reports that I've seen in terms of just one that really is very transparent. It's very clear. And they use illustrations like this to be able to show how they believe they create value for a number of different key audiences. So these would be things that they're probably already, you know, they have been tracking for a while, but it's just that intentional approach that they're taking. Whereas in an organization like Clariant, they're taking, we're seeing certainly a trend of companies talking a little bit more about the inputs going into an organization, financial and other resources, and how those are turning into outputs, outcomes, and in some cases impacts. This is where companies have to develop a greater level of sophistication around really trying to understand, you know, impacts is one of those things that most companies are really unwilling to talk about, and they're really still trying to figure out, especially, you know, given risks around additionality or around, you know, basically, you know, companies want to make sure that they are not taking credit for things that have had other involvement, for instance. But I feel like Clariant is one of those organizations that have laid it out very well and have made some linkages across the report. When we're looking at frameworks, this is the alphabet soup that I think some of us were talking about before: GRI, SASB, TCFD, ABCD, and just so it's clear, ABCD isn't like a thing. So with the Sustainable Development Goals, I think everyone in this room has known about the SDGs for a while, and it's been really exciting to be able to see that 90% of companies within the sample are showing their commitment in some form or fashion. And that's a good thing, you know, but I think that we do risk issues around greenwash, or what we within our firm call SDG wash, where things get kind of real is where companies are able to show their commitment to specific goals and to targets under those, to show what their contribution is towards those particular targets. So, you know, what does that look like? In the case of ShareIt, they're a resource company, being able to show those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 goals that they support, and within those, what they believe their contribution is towards meeting specific targets. I think that's where you can show that a real intent is being shown kind of within that space. And when we're looking at SASB and TCFD reporting, these are relatively new standards and frameworks. And the intent around SASB is to be able to provide further disclosures within a financial report rather than necessarily putting those into a sustainability report only. And with TCFD, this is around companies being able to talk about their issues, risks, how they're handling managing issues around climate change. What does that look like? In the case of Bank of Montreal, in their last report, it's to be able to break things down into four major categories for TCFD. That's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. To talk about how the company is addressing governance, strategy, what are the four? Risk management and metrics and targets. Thank you, Whitney. And you know, this is really an area where, for companies that are a PRI signatory, for instance, that is a requirement. This is not an option. You know, for companies to not address climate change is a big no-no. I think any mainstream investor or analyst is going to be able to say, you know, to point the finger and to say, listen, what's going on in your organization? If you're not able to show that you understand the wider implications of climate change on your business, then we're probably going to divest from you. Maybe that's strong language, but I think that that's something that's coming. But one of the things that I think that we're not going to be, that we may see less of, but is exciting to see, perhaps in the near term, maybe in the next few years, is companies having that wider discussion around how are they actually going to be affected by a 2-degree and a 4-degree change in temperature. That is a difficult discussion that all of these organizations are having. It's something where there's a lot of data that's being shared, a lot of subjectivity as well. But that's where, where we can get to, where companies can get to a place where they're able to actually potentially share, but also to understand what are some of the changes that they should be anticipating for their business. And just wondering if that might be something that you wanted to touch on a little bit as well. Whitney, yeah. It's something where there's a mutual sense of passion for this space.
Yeah, so back to the topic of climate change. For those of you who don't know, the TCFD is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which was a group that was put together by the Financial Stability Board of the World Bank. And in June of 2017, they came out with a set of recommendations for how companies and the economy more generally should be thinking about climate-related financial risks and opportunities. So the focus is very much on the financial risks. And for companies in the financial services sector, it's particularly topical. We're exposed to climate-related risks, both if society takes action on climate change and if we don't take action on climate change. So if we do, the financial risks will result from things like carbon pricing, more stringent regulations, shifts in market preferences as new technologies come on board. And if we don't, then the physical impacts of climate change will become more severe, which could impact our own operations and the operations of our customers. And so what we want to avoid is a situation where we don't do anything, the physical impacts become so severe that very abrupt and stringent regulatory measures come into place. And that's what we would call a not smooth transition to a low carbon economy. And so what the task force proposes is that one way to achieve this smooth transition to a lower carbon economy is through disclosure. So by getting good quality information on the climate-related financial risks that companies face out into the market can more accurately price those risks, and the economy will react in a way that begins the shift to a lower carbon economy. And so BMO supports those recommendations, and we produced our first TCFD-aligned report last year, which was the index that Wes showed, and we're excited that this year we're going to be able to disclose much more detail on how we're approaching climate-related risks, which includes beginning to conduct analysis that tries to understand what the impact of these 2 and 4 degree scenarios might be on our clients and on our business.
Great. And just so you guys know, I was told the session's going to go till 12:45 because we started a bit late, so we'll definitely have time for questions here. And I'll just go through a few different topics here, ones that may or may not be a familiar space to you, but materiality is essentially the notion of companies really needing to be able to show how they've identified what matters most to their business as it pertains to sustainability. And what those topics are. That forms really the essence of what a company should be communicating and reporting into their report. So to no surprise, 95% of companies identify their priority topics. 89 describe their approach to identify what their priorities are, so having that level of transparency. And around 70% are using an illustration. So this is a common way in which this kind of information is shared on a matrix. Being able to share that kind of top right-hand quadrant would be, the area where the most important priorities would be to a company. But I find it also really interesting for companies like Air France, for instance, to be able to provide details around helping people understand that sphere of influence, or who are some of the key stakeholders, and also for those different stakeholder groups. It's one thing for Air France to be able to share, these are the top 10 company or top 10 priorities for our entire business. To be able to segment it by key audiences like customers, shareholders, government organizations, that helps provide some valuable context to really help understand, what does matter to those key audiences. When we're looking at digital strategies, this is, essentially being able to use social media and other forums to be able to have a bit more of a back and forth, rather than being able to just send things out and or developing, reporting for certain audiences. So the first most obvious piece would be, okay, what are companies actually doing to promote their report, and how many are doing that? I was surprised that 18% are not doing that. 82% are promoting it on social channels, 50% promoting on their homepage. And I think you could see from Tim's example at Maple Leaf that, the report is something that is front and center. It's certainly very much aligned to their purpose and as a proof point to what the organization is doing. So, the example here is of that. But it's also carrying through using social media, for instance, to not only promote the report early on, but to be able to think of the report as a series of assets. Because let's face it, the masses are not clamoring to read a report, but they may be rather interested in what Maple Leaf is doing around animal welfare or around community investment or around other issues. So to be able to think of the report being composed of a number of different areas, and to be able to reach out to different audiences to find out, okay, through analytics, what can we learn about different audiences and the things that they're interested in, and where there seems to be a level of response that might provoke the company to have a more of a regular engagement on some of these types of topics. I'm not sure, Tim, if there's anything you wanted to kind of talk about further in that space.
Yeah, sure. I personally have to admit, due to generational issues, I'm not that savvy in social media.
Are you on Instagram?
I think so. Might have a follower. Probably one of my kids. There's an important aspect for both internal and external communications on a sustainability team in a company to be connected. This is a platform, or these platforms, we're able to communicate and sustain our communications throughout the whole course of the year, instead of right around the time we release our 100-page sustainability report, right? So we develop internally a calendar, sometimes aligned to what's happening in broader society, like Earth Hour or World Environment Day, or like, for example, we did a bunch of tweeting around the UN climate conference in New York City that just passed. So we take a look at these opportunities and able to then amplify what we're doing on a variety of different channels through this kind of diverse forms of communication. I have to say, though, the external communication is one thing. I think it's equally and perhaps even more important that you do the same thing internally, right? So we have internal social media channels. We have this thing called Yammer, and in big company, it's kind of just like Twitter or whatever internally in the organization. And those groups are incredibly active, And so we post internally on our intranet. We have a site called My MLF, My Maple Leaf Foods. We have stories and blogs. We post through Yammer. We do posters around the hallways. Tons of stuff like that that I think is equally, if not more important, to engage and keep communicating with your employees as it is with the outside world.
Thanks, Tim. The other thing that's a common part of this as well, when we're thinking about a digital strategy, is the extent to which there's own content versus shared earned media. And own content would be companies generating their own content, talking about themselves, putting it online, versus shared earned media, getting third parties or to be able to write about a company or being able to share something that someone else has said about your organization. And I think the more shared earned media you can be able to get, obviously there's opportunities to be able to gain, a reputation edge, I suppose, rather than just being able to beat one's own chest. One of the things that I found really interesting, and I'm seeing more companies doing, is companies being able to start podcasts as a way to be able to not only getting companies to feature what they're doing, but to be able to bring in subject matter experts from other spaces to talk about important issues, but in this long form conversation rather than just as sound bites. And I know it's something that you guys have been working on a bit, Whitney, at BMO with Michael and can you speak briefly about
Yeah, sure. So just this past year, BMO launched its own podcast called Sustainability Leaders. And I would encourage you all to check it out, bmo.com/sustainability leaders. And we've published 9 episodes so far. And in those episodes, our Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of Sustainable Finance interview leading thinkers in the sustainability space. And so the goal is to demonstrate thought leadership and to kind of elevate the sustainability conversation to something that's a little bit more in the weeds and meant for sustainability practitioners. So we interview academics, business leaders. We've had guests from the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, from the World Bank, talking about green bonds, that kind of thing. So I encourage you guys to check that out.
Mm-hmm. It sounds sufficiently nerdy.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, the key with things like this is to really kind of encourage that conversational format, that you're able to talk about the tough stuff sometimes. And maybe it helps us understand that some of these issues are a lot more complicated than they seem, that things haven't been totally sorted out, but everyone's still trying to figure things out sometimes. So, integrated marketing is another thing that I'm really interested in, particularly from the angle of innovation. I feel like there's a really great opportunity that companies can be able to take, rather than only to reach out to people within their organization, which is, of course, a really important thing, but to reach out to beyond the organization, to be able to identify some key areas where a company wants to innovate, and to be able to provide some level of incentive for people to bring in ideas. And on top of that, of course, to be able to have that innovation management program in place so that you can receive, evaluate, and determine whether or not you want to invest in these areas. So with NL, they've been doing this for a couple of years now. And I have to, I think it's been very successful for them to be able to bring in ideas from unlikely people or organizations sometimes. So not only does it bring in new ideas, but it might even be a really great HR engine as well, to be able to think about new talent that could come in or new partners that a company can establish. For storytelling, I think that both Whitney and Tim talked about this a great deal in terms of, from a purpose standpoint, being able to establish who the organization is and what is it really trying to achieve as an organization. So I don't think we need to talk too much more about that. But I wanted to share this example from Westpac in that, it isn't always about companies talking about the good stuff. It's about also being able to acknowledge where were some considerable misses. And Westpac did a great job here. This is like a Westpac love fest going on. But I really appreciate what they pulled together. This is the cover of the report. It says strength, service, trust. And they spent this entire report basically talking about the issues and talking about how important it is to be able to earn that trust back after having some issues facing the business from a data standpoint. a common issue for the financial services sector. So that level of transparency, I think, really earned them some kudos, and it is really about how you choose to address those different issues. And certainly an area that Maple Leaf had handled around a decade ago as well, and where Michael McCain, I also admire what he had done as well, kind of pushing the lawyers to the side and to say, listen, we're going to own up to this, and it's our job now to be able to earn your trust through our actions in the future. So supporting narrative, this is around the use of storytelling. And all I want to say around this is that there are some really effective ways to be able to do storytelling in different formats. And so the example here from Van City just shares that within the PDF report, because it's more of a fact-based document, you may want to just reference a story to be able to reference a proof point of something that the organization's doing. And for people that want to learn more, they could go onto the website to be able to see it in long form, to be able to see a video. But that's where we're talking about things being in a very kind of intentional way, that the companies are being able to plan and pull these things together. I have two more areas that I'll briefly cover, and then we'll get right to Q&A. Supply and value chain, as Tim said, a lot of times companies make the false assumption that their audience knows exactly what they do. And that couldn't be farther from the truth sometimes. So I think one of the things that we're encouraging a lot of companies to do is through their words and through illustrations, through videos sometimes, to make sure that the audience really understands, what does a company actually do? What is within their sphere of influence, for instance, the things that they directly do and the areas that they can influence, because that frames the rest of the report. It frames that whole understanding of, like, why are we talking about these different issues and perhaps not talking about others because of perhaps a lack of influence that a company has in driving change. If you think of, let's say, what is that Swedish clothing company, M&S? H&M, 2 letters, H&M. They're able to talk a great deal about what they're involved in design and textile manufacturing, but when it comes to shipping, not a lot of ability to influence change in that respect. So, that's where it's being able to lay it all out at the beginning. And so something even very straightforward like what Maple Leaf has in place here can help people just generally understand what the organization does early on within the report. And for something like Air France here, being able to share that level of transparency, working with a third party like EcoVadis, for instance, to be able to talk about what it has been, how it's worked with this organization to ensure that its suppliers are meeting some of the same goals that it wants for its own business. The last topic is around performance and impact. And this is really just the extent to which companies are willing to provide that kind of balanced account of what an organization, how it's performing. Very happy to see in a way that fewer companies are providing short-term targets and more seem to be providing longer-term targets. So that really gets to the point of a lot of these sustainability reporting. It is to be able to provide forward-looking information rather than just talking about the past. It is about being able to share about what is the intent, what are we really trying to do here, what are we trying to accomplish, and beyond just fancy words, what's the target here, what's the end game, and what does that really look like? We've certainly, in the case of BMO, they've been great at being able to show, when it comes down to it, there's a set of metrics that they're using to be able to measure how they're progressing, and being able to establish targets for some of the key parts of their business. And I think we're going to be seeing an update in the upcoming report, which will be released in December. With a company like Crown Estate, for those who haven't heard of Crown Estate, they're a real estate company in the UK that have been doing a fantastic job of being able to really measure what they call their contribution or their impact. And finally, with Mirvac, I just want to share this because this gets to the notion of backcasting, of being able to share what those 2030 targets are, but beyond that, how are we actually going to get there? Having those midterm targets to show these aren't just fluffy targets that we have at the top. We actually have thought about what is it going to take for us to get to 2030. I'm going to wrap it up at this because you obviously have some questions to ask. We want to be here for you. Let's get some questions going. Okay, I'll just go with your question.
Thank you. So I had a question to Whitney about, last month, I think the UN's environmental program had released principles of responsible banking, and with 130 banks and out of 49 countries, and I think the top 5 banks in Canada were not signed on to that pledge. So do you have anything am I missing something? Basically?
For sure. Yeah, we are well aware of the principles for responsible banking, and have been taking a lot of time and effort in looking into them in a great amount of detail and gaining an understanding of what is actually required of signatories. And one of the things that's required of signatories is to conduct an impact analysis. And part of the hesitation amongst the Canadian banks, and we're all very closely engaged on this topic and are likely going to sign together as a group at some point in the future. But the methodologies to conduct that impact analysis aren't yet fully developed. BMO is part of a working group to develop those tools and methodologies. And so once there's more clarity on what's required to conduct the analysis, and once we have a sense of what we're actually committing to, so we're committing to conduct the analysis, and then based on what impacts we identify through that analysis, maximize the positive and minimize the negative. And so we just want to make sure we know exactly what we're signing on to before we move forward with it.
Hi there, this question could be for either of you, but it's about the idea of transparency. And let's say, hypothetically, some meat was lost from refrigeration issues, or there was a typo in BMO's envelopes or something. Would you report that in the integrated report, or would there be a risk of investors seeing that in a negative light rather than something that could see as more trust and transparency?
Yeah, I'll just respond quickly. I think it totally depends on kind of the materiality of that issue as it comes to light. Certainly, if there are food safety issues, Maple Leaf has ample opportunities to communicate on that through press releases, through reporting through to the CFIA, as well as for investors, any quarterly updates, etc. Wes brought it up earlier. Our sustainability reports are backcasting, looking at the previous year, much like an annual financial report. And so that's why we have all these other channels to try and communicate more immediate areas of interest. And I think that's a challenge for organizations. Can we get to more real-time sustainability reporting? I think all organizations are taking a look at that internally, but because of the strong links with the finance side, that sometimes is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for the insight. I want to really come from the nutrition perspective. Are there efforts you've put in to balance healthy consumption and sustainable production of alternative protein sources? Because you see, we talk about alternative protein sources, and a lot of arguments have been put in place on how sustainable these things will be, especially for low-income earners and for developing countries that really need high protein, high bioavailable protein, from animal sources. Yeah. So how do you balance? Are there efforts put in place to balance healthy consumption and this sustainable production of alternative protein sources?
That's a great question. Something that I certainly can't answer in a very short way. It would be something that we could debate for hours and hours and hours. But I think what sustainability is about balance as well. So this explosion in plant-based protein is wonderful for a number of different actors and stakeholders and consumers right across the world. As well, when we look into even alternative forms of protein like cultured meat. So they basically are harvesting stem cells from cows and chickens and pigs and growing the meat protein in a lab in a petri dish or a large petri dish, and then making food products out of it. The balance comes when you look at one attribute in isolation and try and compare it. So a plant-based burger like a Beyond Meat burger or a Light Life burger, yes, is less environmentally impactful at one part of the supply chain because you're not raising an animal, right? But to get what's on trend is plant-based burgers that now look like meat, taste like meat, have the same mouthfeel, and those kind of attributes. What do you have to put in to those plants to make them look like meat, smell like meat, taste like meat? A lot of artificial ingredients and binders and fillers. So do consumers choose food products for one single attribute? Likely not, right? They want health attributes. They want all these different aspects. And that's what makes it really confusing. And when a product is so new and coming onto market, it's really expensive, right? And until supply and demand kicks in and those prices come down, it is not necessarily an affordable form of protein for low-income earners, right? And so these kinds of balances are pervasive throughout the journeys that we take. You know, I can go into our manufacturing facilities and say, you must reduce the amount of water you use to meet our goals. And they can only go so far because we have strict food safety and sanitation requirements to make sure that we satisfy food safety regulations. So everything we talk to is about a balance. And I would love to get down into the weeds on nutrition and plant protein. It's so new and emerging. It's really exciting to be a part of it. And I think that's a very important piece, though. Great question. Okay.
Thank you guys for all being here today. My question is about reporting more broadly. So I know a lot of public companies have been producing reports for years. I guess my question is, has there been an increase in private companies that have been producing sustainability reports? And if so, what are some differences that you see in their reporting content and structures in compared to public companies?
I can probably answer that as the researcher in this. I think generally speaking, yes, there is an increase in the number of privately held companies doing a sustainability report, but it is with less rigor than what you would see with a publicly traded company. You do have, for instance, companies that are owned by Berkshire Hathaway that they will be doing disclosures, for Uncle Warren, and then that information is being able to be provided for Berkshire, for instance. You see the same thing for Johnson & Johnson, or sorry, SC Johnson, for instance, they're providing, but it's not to the same level of rigor. And I would say that in a lot of cases, it's more to be able to invoke that kind of sense of commitment, emotional response, rather than drilling down into, let's say, SASB or GRI.
I would just comment as well, both private and public companies, even government organizations, need to communicate on what their organizations are all about. So call it a sustainability report or whatever. Yeah. I think a point was made earlier about attraction of talent and connecting with consumers and employees. This is a great way for prospective employees to come and look at your website, look at your sustainability report, identify if your organization evokes the same values that you personally do, to make a decision even if you want to apply for an opportunity. So I would think that private organizations are all in on that kind of thing as well. Yeah,
just a different approach or an intention. I think we just, Whitney, do you?
Well, I'll just add that it's something that the financial community would highly encourage as well for privately held companies to disclose. So a lot of the loans that we make are to private companies. And so in order for us to assess them and do due diligence on them, that kind of reporting that's consistent in the same way that we're seeing some level of consistency amongst publicly traded companies would be really valuable.
I know you, okay, maybe 5 more minutes. We've got a lot of keeners here.
I guess the only issue is that
yeah,
lunch is next.
Like anybody who wants to leave can leave. But there are a couple of burning questions here. I see even people who have like written down their question, like it's like it's intense.
So I have my question is partly a question by Gokul. I have two questions, so kindly bear with me. The first question is with regards to sustainability reporting. So I'm talking more from the perspective of overall companies, not from the sample size that you have chosen, the real 88% of the companies. So out of all the companies, not just top companies in the specific sector, do you foresee any sort of government imposition for the organizations to publish their sustainability reports? Because while I was working on a project, I was checking the sustainability reports of different companies. I do not see all those reports are published even on their website or not even on social media sites. So do you see any sort of government impositions on it in addition to the peer pressure and the shareholder pressures on it?
I can speak to that mainly from a climate perspective. So we are seeing governments imposing regulations in various jurisdictions that require climate reporting, particularly in line with the TCFD frameworks that we've seen. In the UK this year, such a regulation was put forward. I don't know if it's final or is still in consultation, but it's in the process. OSFI, which is our financial regulator, also did a bunch of research contacting companies to understand how they're approaching climate and how they're disclosing on it. And so TBD, but it's an indication that those types of regulations may be coming down the pipe. So we think it's coming.
Last question right here. I think there's some grumbling tummies.
Hey, thank you for your presentations. My question is to Tim. My research currently is focused on egg production in Canada. And one of the issues we are facing is the conflicts between animal welfare and sustainability. So any housing system that's better for animal welfare is our impact assessment show that it's more resource intensive, more energy intensive. So have you come across such conflicts within your company? And if so, how are you trying to address those?
Yeah, so just to confirm, you said egg production. So we're not a producer of eggs, but that is a supply managed industry in Canada. While I was at Tim Hortons, we did a lot of research into egg production. And I think your question is getting at is that some of these more alternative housing systems that might be deemed more sustainable for animal welfare aspects are less sustainable from energy, water, waste, air emissions. And that's exactly true. I think there was if you haven't already found them, there's an organization in the US called the Coalition for Sustainable Egg Supply. And what was fascinating was that, it did a 3-year research program comparing animal welfare outcomes with 3 different types of housing systems. One cage-free, all the way to the existing battery cages. And the system that won out was right in the middle, kind of more colony, caged environments or enriched environments from all aspects. And they had 5 pillars. They had environment, they had health and safety, occupational health and safety of the workers, animal welfare, a whole bunch of them. And it came up right in the middle. But what consumers believe is that the most sustainable system from an animal perspective is the cage-free environment. And when, rightly or wrongly, large brands, the big quick service restaurants and the retailers all started to commit that their eggs and their private label products will be sourced from cage-free farmers, the whole industry pivoted and tipped. I don't think that's ever going, particularly in the US where corporations own massive farms. It's not like that here in Canada, but it's going to be a much longer transition to those housing systems than the years that they've said we will be cage-free by then. And I think what the industry is hoping is that more research can be done to counterbalance that. And that's, again, it's another example of the balance of sustainability issues in all aspects of the supply chain.
Great. Thank you all very much for a very engaged crowd here, for a fantastic panel, for a fascinating topic. And I guess we're having our lunch break now. Thanks.